So in the last video we left off kind of at this point. My explosion might look a little different from yours. One of the things I hate it when mine looks different than the person doing the tutorial, but um, in the burst shape I just changed the spread angle to 180 degrees, which means it's actually going to be shooting down sometimes, which is fine. I changed the number of trailings down, and then when I simulate it in the Pyro Solver setup, I have it closed below, treat Y as closed below 0, so sometimes like these ones are going to get clipped off. And when we're going to add more explosions, it's going to give us like a lot more variety in the explosions. So for this one, how do we make these fire trails a little more like crisp? Because right now they look like huge and ugly. So it's all in this volume rasterize attribute and the trail source. So remember, we wanted those kind of like inverted, or I mean we wanted that like kind of teardrop shape. And if we go to volume rasterize attribute, it's just these like giant blobs, and the real trick is we just want to get these blobs as small as possible while still being able to see them. So if we do the voxel size to like 0.025 and the particle scale to 0.05, right there, that's getting us much closer to where we want to be. There still will be a kind of a problem, I think, where you can see basically it's like there aren't enough substeps, but every substep you add slows down the simulation. So if you go in the volume rasterize attribute, let's see what it looks like. If we turn on velocity blur and then we turn the shutter all the way up to 1, it's going to stretch those out more. But right now it's stretching them out in front of where they're going, and we want it stretching out behind. So do shutter offset, drag it all the way back to -1. So now, without having to add substeps, we've stretched out those teardrops, and we're getting that like longer trail. You might even mess with like increasing the length and maybe even the radius just a touch, but I'm not going to mess with these too much. But that's how you avoid doing substeps. Yeah. Okay, so let's say you wanted to add multiple. Well, let's just say, what if you wanted your trails to like bounce off a wall? So we would say add a box, and they were kind of blowing over on this side. And I'll just stretch this up. Hold shift, stretch those out. Oop. And there's this cool feature in the trail source where if you scroll down to the bottom on trail path, scroll down to the bottom, there's basic collision, say enable static collision. And maybe I can just drag this box into that slot. Yay. And so we can see they kind of bounce off right along there. Let's see how that looks. So that's cool. If we wanted our box to actually influence the other smoke simulation, we would need to convert it to a collision object. So that would be VDB from polygon. And if this was a moving collision object, you would also want to add a trail SOP to give it some velocity and say compute as velocity. And then in the VDB from polygon, you change this distance VDB name to collision because it's a collision object, and that's the name that this Pyro Solver is looking for. And again, if it was moving, you would say surface attributes, add that, and say add point V, and then you drag that into collision. Now if it's moving, it only will simulate the movement if you're not doing the OpenCL, so you'd have to turn that off. Let's see. I'm going to make my smoke last longer so we can see. And maybe I'll increase its velocity so it blows out there, so we can see that that smoke is hitting a wall. Okay, in the next video we'll look at, well, what if we wanted to take this style of explosion and multiply it a bunch of times?